For those who know me, I've been living in Oahu for about a year and a half, and for the past 6 months I've been considering flying a paramotor from Oahu to Maui. It's only about an 80-mile straight line distance, but it's never been done before for several reasons. The first of these, and foremost, is the weather and trade winds here are pretty much constant, and fighting those to make any meaningful forward progress is a challenge, which makes the second issue even more troublesome, which is a 30-mile channel crossing over the open ocean. And then on top of that, the airspace here is complicated and air traffic is congested. Even so, I built the plan with a decent route that navigated the airspace and just waited for a weather window to cooperate. And that window finally came on 25 miles. And this is how it was done. On the day of the attempt, I knew that weather conditions were going to be bad at pretty much every altitude below 8,000 feet. Winds were going to be high, and later in the day, it was going to be sketchy from thermal activity and mountain rotor. If you keep an eye on the palm trees, you'll be able to see just how bad the wind actually is. I knew the launch was going to be sketchy, but if I could get in the air, I knew I could eventually climb over it and make forward progress. Having a calm day at 10,000 feet and higher was really rare, and I needed it to be calm at that altitude to be able to safely make the channel crossing to be able to glide to either Oahu, where I started, or if I get far enough over the channel to Molokai, my next destination. Once I got off the ground, I was greeted with an incredible sunrise before I had to take on my next challenge, which was going to be the airspace. I had been battling with a 20-mile-an-hour cross headwind that was limiting my progress to about 10 miles an hour. However, as I climbed out and finally crossed the threshold beyond 8,000 feet and ultimately to 11,000 feet, that quartering headwind finally dissipated. This view here is from my highest point at about 11,000 feet and at the halfway point between Oahu and Molokai. Once I finally reached the shore of Molokai, I knew that the most dangerous water crossing was behind me, and the only challenges really left were just to make sure that my fuel consumption was good and that I didn't get into any mountain rotor as I was traveling to Maui. The Nirvana F-Fly already has an incredibly good fuel efficiency, but I was actually doing even better than I had anticipated. So I decided to see if I could touch another island before I went to Maui, which is going to be Kaho'olawe. However, as I was descending into the island, I realized as I passed through 5,000 feet and started hitting turbulence, I looked down at my airspeed and I was making forward progress at about 5 miles an hour. I had gotten out of the relatively calm air at 10,000 feet and had descended into what was wind shear coming off of the mountain on Maui. For those who don't know, the peak on Maui is over 10,000 feet and it can create some pretty adverse weather conditions on the lee side of it. You can actually look at the clouds here and see just how different the cloud formations are where the rotor is generated by the mountain on Maui. At this point I realized I wasn't going to have enough fuel to touch Kaho'olawe and also make Maui, especially if I was going to have to make progress at a snail's pace of 5 miles an hour, and then climb back to 8,000 to 10,000 feet to be able to get above that headwind. So I made the decision to bail on the attempt for Kaho'olawe and climb back out to 9,000 feet and turn directly towards Maui. And fortunately, as I climbed back out, I got out of that headwind and was able to make forward progress at a reasonable pace. As I began my descent into Maui, the next challenge I had to tackle was getting into and under the airspace on the approach plate into the Maui International Airport. I had been flying at 8,000 feet, and the floor of the airspace that I had to get under was at 2,000 feet. With that in mind, I crabbed along the west side of the airspace to allow myself to burn altitude as I idled down and pulled trims out to be able to make forward progress, and had a really beautiful vista as I descended over the windmills and through the clouds that were generating on the east face of the West Mountain in Maui. As I approached the LZ and the gas station that I had picked out on Maui to be able to refuel, I realized that it was not going to be an easy landing. If you keep an eye on the palm trees here, you'll see that The winds are extremely high and gusting. It looked like I was going to be landing in a hurricane. But at this point, I had about 2.5 liters of gas left, and I was committed to landing somewhere in the near vicinity, and the winds weren't going to be better anywhere else. As I got closer to the ground and realized just how little forward progress I was making, even at trim 6 on the Warp 2, I realized that I was going to have to do the best I could and just let trims all the way out as I go in for this landing, which again on the Warp 2 has an airspeed of about 40 miles an hour. And even with that, when I touched down, I was only going a couple miles an hour. As I touched down, I was ecstatic that I had dodged the worst of the gusts and was able to maneuver the wing into the brush on my right so that it would snag on the scrub, and there was no chance of me getting drug at that point. So given the conditions, I was pretty excited that this went off without a hitch and I was able to land on my feet. This flight ended up being just over 100 miles covered in 3 hours and 25 minutes. Almost all of that time spent at 11,000 feet, trims completely out on the Warp 2, using
Whoopsie.
Happy Wednesday. Sorry about that, guys. So sorry, Zach. And that's an awesome video. I really enjoyed that.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was an incredible flight. I tried to capture it as best I could to be able to share it with folks on the tail end of it, but
yeah,
video was definitely my lowest priority. Just
right.
Getting through the flight and making it back in one piece was definitely number one on that list.
Right. That's awesome. So what did your wife think about this?
Hesitant, of course, but this is something I've been doing for a long time, so she was definitely used to the stress and of this whole thing. And we had a contingency plan because I could store my stuff on Maui, just rent a storage unit somewhere and just get a flight from Maui to Oahu either that day or the next day. Worst case scenario if I got stuck out there.
Does she fly at all?
No.
No.
All right. Question in the chat. I don't know. I think I'm missing. Yep, I got. There's another one.
Jim, CR.
Okay. This one is. Did you consider using a speed bar?
So I hardly ever fly with a speed bar, and since this one wasn't a race, I didn't even equip it, so I didn't even leave it as an option for myself. Yeah, I could have gone faster with a speed bar, but I don't know. I just didn't. To me, the extra hassle on the ground doesn't end up being worth the ability to go 30% faster in flight, especially considering the fuel burn. When I originally planned this flight, I was wanting to touch 5 Hawaiian islands, which means I was going to be going slow and efficient to preserve as much gas as I could to make all those landings. But the weather conditions it didn't end up allowing for that to happen. So I didn't even plan to use a speed bar from the beginning. Given the way it actually panned out, it would have helped out for me to be able to get there and beat some of those headwinds a little bit better. But
would speed bar actually impact your efficiency quite a bit?
Oh yeah,
because people don't use speed bar just for like going 2 hours straight on an XC, do they?
Only when you're doing something like a speed run cup that Nirvana hosts. Those are events where you just need to go as quick as possible, and that's basically like 2 hours straight of speed bar, as fast as the machine will physically go, and that's how you get to like 50 miles an hour on the Warp 2. But I was fine with being able to go like 42 or 44, depending on the conditions, with just the trims.
Yep, you're muted.
Okay, try again.
Jim CR120 wants to know, did you travel to Oahu just for the challenge? What did you do to get your equipment there?
So I actually lived on Oahu there for a little over a year and a half. I had already had all my paramotoring equipment there with me to fly. Unfortunately, Oahu is a small island, so after just a handful of flights, you've kind of seen everything. Not that it isn't beautiful, but once you've seen it, it's only as much, so fun to see it again and again and again. And I've always had this thought, because when I take off from my main LZ on Oahu, you can see the island of Molokai way off in the distance, just out in the haze across the ocean. And I've always wondered if it would be possible to go that kind of distance on a paramotor. Turns out when you look on a map, it's only like 30 miles from Oahu, but 30 miles of open ocean was still required a lot of planning to be able to make that crossing safely anyway. And not to mention that Hawaii, the weather there is so interesting. Because being on the island, it has constant trade winds, usually from the northeast, ranging from 10 to 25 miles an hour or higher, day to day. So finding a weather window where it was safe to do this on the ground and more importantly at altitude was pretty tough. So in probably 2 months of looking for weather, I only found the one day, and even then, conditions on the ground were just trash. But I had a really rare day where at 10,000 feet and higher, the wind was almost non-existent. And so that was my go criteria, was something that I could suffer through on the ground and great conditions at altitude, because that's what I really needed to have the weather be good at 10 or 11,000 feet to be able to make the crossing safely.
So speaking of weather, is ocean weather and wind patterns relatively predictable? Because I thought I read somewhere that sometimes, if you look at there's gust fronts or just random anomalies that we would want to avoid, that's not always predictable. But I don't know anything about ocean weather patterns.
Yeah, on the island, you really don't have that too much. It rarely gusts because there's no terrain to affect the wind. It's just what you get from the ocean because 2,000 miles in just about any direction, it's all ocean. Mm-hmm. So there's very little aside from like tropical storms or the rare thunderstorm that would cause any real disruption to the wind to cause, gusty conditions. So it's pretty predictable that you're going to have just high winds from the northeast pretty much all year round. It's at altitude, making sure there's not like a shear layer or anything between the ground winds where you have those trades and what you have at 10,000 feet. That's the more just making sure that those two different wind conditions lined up to be flyable.
What's your personal threshold for shear layer differences?
Really, I just look if there is a sharp difference. I'll just choose between like wind direction. Like you look at 1,000 feet and then the next 1,000 feet, the wind's completely different. And you have like a 30-mile-an-hour difference in the direction of the wind, like 15 miles an hour here, 20, and then 10 miles an hour the other way. I know that at some point in that 1,000-foot gap, I'm going to run into a 30-mile-an-hour change of wind. And that's going to be a lot for a fabric wing to handle. So I'll just choose not to fly on that day. Okay. However, shear was never really the problem. It was just finding a day where the wind was low at 10,000 feet to be able to make, predictable forward progress, not only one direction, but to be able to make it back. If I was just going one way, I would have been fine with having a really high tailwind, at 10,000 feet to get me to Maui. But having that strong tailwind to get me there means I'm going to have a really strong headwind to get back. And at 100 miles of distance, having much of a headwind starts adding a lot of unpredictability to whether I'm going to make it or not. Yeah.
Did you have a chase boat with you?
I did not.
No.
So I had 3 layers of, of planning. The first was that I'm just going to have enough gas and not have an issue or not have a motor out. The second was that.
Oh yeah, you fly in Nirvana. You didn't have to worry about a motor out. Yeah.
Well, and the second one was that if I did have a motor out, because it is a 2-stroke, even if it is a Nirvana, if I did have a motor out, I wanted to be able to make sure that I could glide to the nearest point of land. So I've got a 30-mile channel crossing. If I'm at the furthest point from land, 15 miles from either one of them, how high do I need to be to glide 15 miles? And so I checked out my wing and what it could do, running some tests at sea level, just like kill the engine at 1,000 feet, see how far I make it. My glide ratio is about 8-to-1. So mathing that out, that means I needed to be right about 10,000 feet to be able to make it a 15-mile glide confidently. And so I flew a little bit higher than that to give myself some buffer room too, knowing that, altitude and everything else.
All right. We've got a couple questions piling up in the chat. And
all right.
First, hang on, I got to find them here.
Bonnie.
I think I saw one earlier about the military. If the military is the reason I moved to Oahu, and it was. I'm in the Air Force, and they PCS'd me out there for about 2 years.
Okay. And then Bill H. is asking, which fly-ins will you be attending next, if any?
That's a tough one. So I've only actually ever been to one, and that was the Suwannee fly-in in Lake Wales, Florida. I lived in Pensacola at the time, and it was actually my very first really long distance cross country where I got gas along the way, where I cross countryed from Pensacola to there. It was like 240 miles. That was my first time really consistently flying over 10,000 feet too. But while I'm here at Shepherd, I'm going to be involved in Air Force pilot training, and that's going to be extremely time consuming while I am here. So I don't know if I'm going to make a fly-in this year or not. But I absolutely want to make it to a Bad Apples and, of course, an endless foot drag at some point.
Right.
I don't know exactly when that's going to be based off of, work, unfortunately.
Right. All right. And then Eric is asking, is there a lot of paramotor pilots in Hawaii?
No. So that actually really surprised me when I moved there. So in 2 years, almost 2 years of living there, I didn't meet another paramotor pilot the entire time I was there.
You are kidding.
Yeah, not another one. And the reason I found out for it is that paragliding is so good there. Apparently, Oahu, Hawaii is one of the best spots in the world for paragliding. And if the paragliding is so good, no one invests in buying a motor, because almost any day with those constant trade winds in the mountains, you have ridge lifts running, 40 miles along some, really beautiful terrain.
I'm selling my motor right now. I've got a paragliding school 2 miles from my new house.
Yeah, I mean, I paraglided only one time while I was there. I ended up, I didn't like the whole having to hike up to the top of the mountain and go. It's nicer when you're in the air, but I can do that with the motor. Put on the motor, climb up, kill the motor, and paraglide, and then crank the motor and land where I want to.
So I guess that answered this question from Jim, CR120.
Oh, yeah. So free flight in Hawaii, it's everywhere. You can go just about anywhere on the island. There's someone that'll walk up to you and start talking to you about paragliding, as long as you have a wing in tow. My paramotor launch site was actually a really popular paragliding, kiting site when they're doing training for newer folks. So Oahu, I would say it's one of the meccas for paragliding, at least in the United States.
So did you ever take advantage?
First, with your physique, you don't want to hike up to launch.
No. Well, it's two different types of working out.
You got to get your cardio. You can't skip leg day, babe.
Did you take advantage of that?
What was that? I'm sorry.
Did you ever take advantage of the free flying?
Just one time.
One time.
I did it once. It was fun and everything, but I preferred putting on the motor and taking off from my field instead of having to hike up the mountain first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Call it lazy.
Yeah.
And Bonnie is asking, what kind of equipment do you fly?
So ever since the Wingman challenge last year, I've been flying a Nirvana F-200. So it's the F-Lite with the 200 size motor, and a Warp 2 are my daily drivers.
Is it the same one that you used for the Wingman, or did you upgrade to a new one then?
So it was the exact same motor and same wing type. But what I learned in the Wingman challenge is if you're going to be at high altitude, you want to be a little bit lighter on the weight range. So for this flight, knowing that I was going to be at 10 or 11,000 feet for the majority of the time I was going to be flying, instead of a 20 meter Warp 2, the one that I flew at the Wingman challenge, I picked up a 22 meter and used that one, which helped me a lot with efficiency and glide when I was at higher altitudes.
So being in the Air Force, how can you afford an F-Lite?
I guess if you save up enough, you can afford just about anything if it's important enough for you, right?
Those things are worth more than my life. Speaking of which, this show is sponsored by F-Light. Their energy drinks taste like crap.
But the can is so nice.
Yes.
All right. So Tony Marzano is, I think you answered most of it. I think he came in just a little bit late, but a ground crew and no boat, no nothing. It was just you, right?
Yeah, just me. I drove my car out to my LZ, loaded everything up, and took off and flew. I didn't. Oh yeah, sorry. I mentioned I had 3 layers of safety. The first, of course, was flying. The second was being able to glide from any point to another, and the third was I had a what do you call it? The little Garmin GPS, the InReach. And if I have ended up going down, let's just say I hit wind shear or something, took a collapse, and had to throw a reserve in the middle of the channel between Oahu and Molokai. So I'm out, 15 miles out in the ocean. The InReach was going to be my last resort. I pushed the SOS button on that thing, and Coast Guard would come out and either send a boat or a helicopter to come and pick me up. But aside from having, my InReach, glide, and a motor that was well maintained, I really didn't have any support for this one. So no boat, no chase boat. That's why I flew as high as I did. Otherwise, I would have stayed lower. And no one on the ground in Maui or Oahu. It was a solo, unsupported, or completely unsupported adventure, which is what I have found that I gravitate towards in my paramotor, or what I enjoy doing with paramotor, just unsupported adventure flying.
You are dangerous, irresponsible, and I'm going to talk crap about you on Facebook.
I mean, you can do dangerous things responsibly.
You're just jealous he's got Nirvana equipment.
And all you have is a T-shirt.
Story of my life.
He won't be long behind, I'm sure.
All right, go ahead.
Jim CR120 wants to know if at above 10,000 feet, were there either temperature or oxygen issues?
So if I was going to stay, if I was going to be flying for a long period, I wouldn't have gone much higher than I did. But at 10 or 11,000 feet, you're pretty good as far as protections from hypoxia. Your time of useful consciousness at 10,000 feet, I mean, it's hours and hours and hours. If you start going up to like 14, 15, 16, then you really have to start worrying a lot more about how much useful consciousness do I have with that amount of oxygen. So that was kind of why I capped my flight at 11,000 feet, because I knew I was going to be there for 2 or 3 hours. I didn't want to have any hypoxia risk. The biggest thing I found that really I actually struggled with at 10 or 11,000 feet was air traffic, because there's a lot of really short hop airline flights that go from Oahu to Maui. And yes, I stayed out of airspace, but still they don't go much higher than 15 or 20,000 feet, because the entire flight's only a couple hundred miles.
Did you see any of any airlines?
Oh yeah, so at 3 or 4 points in the video, you'll see a couple airliners. The one I didn't catch was probably my closest contact to one. I was on my way from Oahu to in the channel, actually, between Oahu and Molokai. There's a Southwest plane that probably flew 1,500 feet over me and maybe a quarter mile laterally to me. Yeah, I could almost make out the tail number from where I was flying. Waved at passengers on it.
Wow.
But I knew if I stayed at 10,000 or lower, it wouldn't be too much of an issue. What I didn't look at, though, was approaching Maui. My flight, I was going to be west of, or what I thought was going to be west of kind of the typical approach plate going into the Maui International Airport. But there were still some airliners that were flying underneath me, and that was disconcerting when you have airliners that are below your altitude. But so I just moved a little bit more west to give them more of a wide berth and avoided them. The only other thing was, other than that, at altitude was cold, because at 11,000 feet, it is really cold, especially when it's 80 degrees on the ground, tropical weather. You can't dress for that and then fly 3 hours at 11,000 feet, because you will freeze. So I got all my winter gear and stuff, so I'm sweating it out on the ground, in a winter jacket. Everyone's looking at me like I'm dumb. And then 11,000 feet, it's 25 degrees up there.
It's like they teach you in Siberian survival school. You got to share bodily warmth. That means you got to do a foot launch tandem without spreader bars. You're going to just stay warm.
Yeah, that'll keep your core temp up.
Mhm.
Daniel is asking, what kind of flotation do you use?
Good question. I have a PPG Smoke, the U float flotation. It mounted pretty seamlessly on the side of the Nirvana.
All right. And Tony is asking, is there any schools in Hawaii? Probably not, seeing you don't have any flyers, huh?
Yeah, a lot of paragliding schools. There's probably a dozen of those, and they're easy to find. Paramotoring schools. I did see, at least on their website, Blackhawk advertises they have a site in Hawaii. I don't know if it is still active or not.
No, that's their marketing on their website, so they appear everywhere. #1 on Google. Like Blackhawk says they're everywhere. No, they're just in California.
Because I was talking to some people about it, and they were asking, well, where can I get trained? And I did a bunch of Googling and searching, trying to find any schools that exist in Hawaii. I could not find one, aside from the Blackhawk website where they advertise it.
Hey, back to your the PPG Smoke floats. Well, not so much the floats, but with all the chatter of the headsets coming out finally. I do get occasionally a update email from like Ryan Roberts, even though I didn't buy one. And he's got the note of, hey, update your address if you've moved and you purchased it, because there's been some chatter. So I totally was like sent him my address and didn't say anything. So if he makes a mistake and accidentally sends me a headset, I'm gonna laugh my freaking butt off.
Oh yeah,
I'll get to punk Ryan Roberts.
And I'm gonna be mad at you too, because I put money down and waited 2 years to get mine. So if you get one,
I'll tell you a little secret. I've had access to them for the past 2 years. I've never actually tried it.
Oh man, so I'm buddies I'm buddies with Jack Burton down in Navarre. He runs one of the LZs.
Oh yeah, I saw one of his tests on that. It's pretty freaking clear.
Yeah, it is incredible.
You can go on Facebook Live and people can hear your heartbeat.
I've had one on order for 2 years now, waiting for it to come out. It'll complete my tech, layout for the cross country kit.
Jim CR120 says wants to know if you had any equipment issues and what gear would you add if you took another trip.
Equipment issues. Nothing really. One thing I wouldn't call it an issue is expected behavior, but troublesome nonetheless. Was my motor on the high needle, I leaned it out a lot because I knew I was going to be spending so much time at high altitude, and it runs really well when it's lean at altitude. But when you bring it back down to sea level, where I was taking off with just a huge disparity in altitudes I was doing, it ran like crap on the ground. And so I had a little bit of starting issues on the ground because I had run it so lean, but I was expecting it. And so I just ran pumping the primer bulb to keep it running rich while I was actually like at ground level. But as soon as I got in the air and climbed up to a little over 3,000 feet, it ran a lot better. My flight from Oahu to Maui, I left it rich on the lean needle or the high needle. And on the ground, it ran great. But when I got to 10,000 feet, I was missing a lot of RPM because at that altitude, you're running way too rich and just greasing up your motor. So I leaned it out on Maui, had some issues on the ground, but then was able to get the full RPM at altitude. So something to consider if you don't have the ability, which I don't know of a whole lot of systems that do, to adjust your tuning mid-flight.
There is Kyle Lowe's got one where he put an attachment so he can get out of one strap, reach around, and just screw.
That would be pretty sweet if you're going to be taking off at sea level and flying at 11,000 feet.
Just basically a hand screwdriver almost, and so you can get out of one strap and still be good. But
it sounds a lot like the way Kyle does things.
Yeah.
Jim says, seems like Oahu has everything, but is it Kauai? Has almost nothing?
So Hawaii, there's 1.5 million people that live on all of the islands collectively. 1.1 million of those 1.5 live on the small island of Oahu. So Oahu it has everything, but it's also really overcrowded, and you really don't get as much of the tropical paradise feel as you do from the other islands. All the other islands, infrastructure is lacking, but you don't have as many people just overcrowding the place too. So, yeah, you got to
And you're
accept
giving me
whatever
that
evil
tropical
you
feel just being here.
I have a question. You know, in the Wingman Challenge, you had some injuries that were pretty significant. Did you have any injuries this time?
None.
Oh, that's awesome.
I was expecting to have some injuries or issues with the way the ground conditions were. It wasn't. It was bad, but not too bad. I think it was like 12 gusting 18 when I took off from Oahu. But when I landed on Maui, I didn't think about it. Something a lesson learned from my for cross country. I was landed between two mountains, and because of that, my LZ was essentially in Venturi between the two. And so the wind conditions on the ground there were just absolutely terrible. I never would have flown if I wasn't, well, I guess already committed to a one-way paramotor adventure there.
What would be your guess was the ground speeds of where you landed?
I think if my best guess, it was probably 18 gusting 30.
Whew.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw in the video when I was landing, I had trims fully out. My airspeed on the Warp 2 with my trims fully out is about 40 miles an hour. And when I landed, it was a two-step landing. My launch, I had trims at 6, which is like a 35 mile an hour.
Because I was surprised your wing came down pretty soft. You didn't have to fight with it or try to kill it pretty hard.
It's because it was trimmed all the way out.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And I brought it down sideways instead of just trying to kill it behind me because I would have gotten drug otherwise. And when I brought it down sideways, I brought it into that tree and the lines got hung up and that killed the wing pretty effectively.
Okay.
Launching was scary. There's a good shot of what I was experiencing on the ground there. I mean, we have flags on my right-hand side. They're just completely pegged out, palm trees bent over. But I tried to time it between gusts because at 18 miles an hour, I can do a launch, do a reverse with trims out. At 30 miles an hour, there's absolutely no way I can do that safely.
Yeah.
And so I tried to time my launch between these gusts, from, those 12-mile-an-hour gusts. And I figured if I could get in the air, I would be all right because the wing can take a 12-mile-an-hour gust once it's airborne. So I just set the trims out to 6, waited. As soon as a gust ended, I brought the wing up, got in the air, and was actually pretty good for about, I don't know, I'd say 20 seconds from bringing the wing up before I get hit with my first gust when I was airborne. But I had enough altitude by then that it was fine and the wing could eat that, no problem.
How does the Warp 2 handle turbulence and stuff like that compared to, say, the wings that we typically fly that people are watching, our A's and B's?
Yeah, so my wings that I have a good bit of experience on are the Spider 3, the Sirocco 2, the Hadron 3, and the Warp 2. Those are my 4 wings. I would say the Warp 2 is noticeably better than the other 3 of those. In the way that it actually just like the cockpit feel of the turbulence. I think it's just got such an aggressive reflex on it that it just does a great job just eating it without a whole lot of pilot input. I did take a few collapses on this flight, but they were relatively minor. I think my biggest one was like a 30% left-hand collapse. And it popped right out really before I put input into it, but by the time I had actually looked up to see it, it was already back out. So,
okay.
So the conditions were trashy and it definitely didn't feel great, but the wing, I think it is way more capable than, I think wings in general are way more capable than we give them credit for. But you fly in bad enough conditions and it doesn't matter how capable a wing is, it's still fabric and strung up by lines. But the Warp 2 was definitely, it handled it like a champ. I was super, super happy with it.
So James is asking, what made you get the Nirvana over the common Moster 185?
So I've flown 2 Moster engines prior to this. I was on the Scout first, flew that for probably a year and a half, 2 years. And then I switched to a Gravity Defiant, which also had a Moster 185 power plant. And the thing that sold me on the Nirvana for me to take the risk and buy one was fuel economy. I learned in my time flying the Scout and then summarily the Gravity Defiant that I was my type of flying that I really enjoy is cross-country adventure flying. Acro is fun. I practiced it and gotten okay at it. Certainly not, good by any means, and certainly by no comparison to some of the folks that are, all over Facebook and stuff. But I found that it's not my love with paramotoring. I like to go out and just explore and see things. And so, and I wanted to go and push the limits as far as how far you can go. And so, I wanted an engine that had really good fuel economy, and pretty much unanimously from what I have done seen in my research is the Nirvana F-Lite kind of takes the cake for high power output efficiency. And during the Wingman challenge, it definitely proved that to me. I had one flight where I flew 6.5 hours with like 15,000 feet of elevation gain and flew like 167 miles. And that was at like 4,000 feet of average altitude, but a lot of ups and downs. And so that blew my mind that, paramotors are capable of that. The reason I bought the Gravity Defiant is because it has a 5-gallon tank on it. So I thought that would be my cross-country motor for a long time. But the Moster, it just drinks gas compared to, some of the smaller capacity engines like an Atom 80 or your top 80s, or for high energy, like a high horsepower power plant, the Nirvana, it's hard to beat. And so that's what ultimately sold me on it.
So James is asking, is the Air Force too good for the Moster?
Too good, no. And honestly, and the Nirvana by no means is like, it's pretty well known as being a pretty expensive power plant, but it's the best, as far as I know of right now, it is the best in the world at what it does, which is long range cross country flying. But if for 95% of paramotor pilots that typically fly for, I don't know, up to an hour, maybe an hour and a half at their, in and around their LZ most of the time, you don't need it. And that's why I was more than happy flying a Moster for the first several years of my flying, because I didn't need to have that, super long range and fuel consumption. And I was fine to I was happy to pay much less for the paramotors that could do that. But
so fun fact, people seem to think on the SR-71 that was the Pratt & Whitney J58 engines on there. It's a secret. Nirvana actually built them.
Oh, did they?
Nirvana J58s, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you pay a lot of a premium, but you get the best fuel economy for the power, right now in the paramotoring world. And that's what allows adventures like this to happen. So if you're somebody that's going to put that to use, it is worth every penny. But if you fly for no more than an hour and a half, call it on the upper end 2 hours at a time, which I'd say is the vast majority of folks, you don't need to pay the extra price for a Nirvana. I think they're sweet motors regardless, but if a Moster can do the job, you have a lot more parts availability and stuff for you.
That's why I'm working for that sponsorship.
Right.
Won't ever get it.
So James
Cousins won't return my phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
So James is asking a question for me, and he wants to know what the first thing I wanted to do when I got home today. Well, the first thing I wanted to see my pups. They won't leave my side now. One's kind of walking around, but otherwise she's on the chair, and this is Teddy. He's falling asleep. And then once I got out of the car, which they jumped into because I have that big fixator on my left foot, I took a nap. I think we all took a nap. It's like, I think it was 4 hours. And Eric woke me up to get my card to go to the pharmacy and get 11 prescriptions. Oh my God. So, yeah, just going to take it easy now because I had so many guests, and, it's between 2 church pastors, which I thought was awesome that, my parents, my original church, their pastor coming in, and then the church that I kind of left to move up to Tomahawk. And then I had people that I went to grade school with coming from Minnesota and that I haven't seen in years to come and visit and bring me stuff and flamingo stuff. That room was full of flamingo stuff, and that doctors and nurses would walk in and say, do you like flamingos? So actually gained a couple of viewers because the nurses and the doctor today said he was going to even check it out. He had no clue what a paramotor was. So, but yeah, took a nap, and I was able to, Eric had to take one, what do you call that? The edging on the door frame to the bathroom, to my bathroom, because the wheels and the little, I'm in a wheelchair. The wheels were a little too wide because I got an extra outer rim that my hands go on instead of using the tires. So,
She wanted a wheelchair with the fancy rims.
yeah. So
She wants chrome. No, it's not chrome.
but I gotta tell you, I gotta tell you, Carrie Fields, I met her 2 or 3 times. Once at Purdon's in Ohio, talked to her twice there, and then we didn't go to Bad Apples this year, but last year we were there, and the year before. But met her again at Bad Apples last year, and she came down and she bought like this on the way to Bad Apples. She bought like a little 3-wheeled scooter, and it was a British little car. So she took Dweese and I for a ride. But I started getting Amazon delivered to the hospital, and the nurses were like, "Really? You're getting Amazon delivered right to your room?" I'm like, "I don't know." She sent me this pink flamingo Snuggie that I think if you look on my page, Eric wore it or tried it on, and one of the nurses put it on, and she was kind of dancing around like a flamingo. And then she, I missed her call, but she called and talked to Eric, and she sent her custom made, because she had some health issues like a year or 2 ago, where she was paralyzed in one of her legs, but she sent me her pink wheelchair. I can't use it right now because the feet are permanent down, and I have to have my feet up a little bit. So once my femur heals from the femur fracture on the right side, I'll be able to put my foot down. And then just the blood rushing to the left foot, I'll be able to put my foot down, hopefully when I get that robot off my foot. So, but people are just amazing, and I appreciate each and every one of you that have reached out and chatted with me this last 32 days. It's been horrible.
Wait, what happened?
Good.
Can you start over? I wasn't listening at all.
Yeah. So anyway, Jim's here, 120. Deweese, go ahead.
Let's see. After you landed in Maui, how long did it take you to get back to Oahu? Did you fly back the same day? What was that like?
So yeah, I landed and I landed probably 50 yards from a gas station, like a Texaco or something. Walked over there, put gas in the engine, and then there's a Raising Cane's there, and picked up some Raising Cane's at the
I like Raising Cane's.
Yeah, had some lunch, went back out to my LZ, and had to, based off the crappy conditions, had to decide, do I go for a launch and try to make it back the same day like I had planned, or do I just get a hotel and hope for better conditions? But I talked to a couple locals while I was getting gas, and they said it never gets any better, like right here, at least in this area. So I just made the call that if I could get enough of a break between gusts, I would just go for it. And so, yeah, I launched from the gas station the same day, probably a couple hours after I landed, after I got gas and food and charged my phone and stuff, and flew back. Fortunately, too, I had a bit of a tailwind going back, and so I made it back about an hour faster than it took me to get out to Maui.
So were there any people there when you landed, and did they look at you weird, like, what the hell where'd you just come from?
Oh yeah. So as I walk up to the pump, I set all my stuff down. I start pumping gas, and one dude's over there pumping gas, and he walks over, kind of his eyes the stuff, and he's like, "So obviously you get a lot of questions. So forgive me if I ask anything you've been asked before, but what is this?" And so yeah, people are just curious. It's not something you see every day at a gas pump. Someone filling up a vertical lawnmower.
I think everybody gets those questions, but that's funny.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting, but yeah, flew back. It was the whole journey round trip was like 7 hours. Took off at 6 in the morning and made it back like 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
That's
how do you feel before you do this kind of stuff? Do you get really like jazzed up over it? Do you get a lot of anxiety? Like, what's going through your mind?
I think to quote one of my favorite movies, Armageddon, it's like, yeah, 50% anxious, 50% excited, more 80% anxious, 20% excited. But it's a mix of both, and when they're both at such high levels, it's hard to really distinguish between them. But definitely a lot of anxiety because anything could go wrong. My worst case scenario, aside from having a moat or to throw a reserve and get stuck in the channel between the two islands, was that I would mess something up on my launch, damage gear, and not be able to get off of Maui. And at that point, have to find a storage unit, rent it, drop all my paramotor stuff in it, get a airline flight back to Oahu and fly there, and then figure out how to get back to Maui to get all my paramotor and my wing and stuff with me. And that was just going to be a nightmare, but ended up fortunately, and was blessed with a good enough weather gap and made it back.
Tony Marzano says you're the first one that he knows of that's flown to Canes. What is it?
Yeah, I flew from Oahu to Maui to have Raising Canes for lunch. Yeah. Is what really, I guess, the bottom line of the trip was.
Yeah, and he wants to know what apps you use.
I did XC Nav was what I used 99%. That was what I used for navigation, position finding, maps, airspace. All of that was on XC Nav. I had Gaggle running the background to do some basically a backup layer of flight tracking. And also I tried to do like a live share, which didn't end up working out the way I had intended. And I also have the Garmin app, that gives you all the pings and everything. So you can use that as a tertiary way. Because this is the first time anyone in the world has flown between any two Hawaiian islands. So I wanted to make sure there was enough proof of it between the GPS apps. But so XCNAV was 99% of what I used, though.
I'm pretty sure, just from my experience, you would have a lot of success if you tried Bumble. That's a great app. No, you really should.
I didn't realize it had a GPS function.
You should have marketed this whole adventure as like flying to Raising Canes for some lunch and just kept it at that. And then people watch and be like, is he really flying between like ocean islands? What's going on here?
Yeah, not trying to be the next Tucker God or anything here.
So, I got a question. Did you contact Guinness Book of World Records?
No, because I thought about it, but turns out to do a Guinness record, you have to let them know ahead of time. They have to have someone like fly out and be physically present when you when you actually accomplish the record to observe it. And since I was waiting on weather for so long, and weather windows would come, and then the day before I'd have everything ready, and then winds at 10,000 feet would have gotten too high or too sheer, and I would have to call it off. And so this one, I actually didn't have the go. Like, I didn't recognize all the stars had aligned for the weather to work out until literally the day before. And so I had already had all my stuff prepped. I saw the day before I wanted to go that the weather had lined up and looked like it was going to be okay. And it stayed that way through the night. I checked it at 4 o'clock in the morning when I woke up. It was still okay, like marginal, but okay. I said, you know what? We're going to go out to LZ and we're going to see. Got out to the LZ. It was exactly like it was predicted, marginal on the ground, but at high altitude, every app I had for checking weather showed that at 10,000 feet it was good. So I decided to send it and go for it.
All right. And then Jim CR120 asked, did you eat during your flight?
No, I knew there was going to be a Raising Canes at the gas station. I did have a bag of trail mix in my little cross-country kit. So, in a pinch, I would have been able to, have something to eat. But during the flight, no. I did drink, though. I had a Camelback with me and ended up drinking some water. Okay. But the Raising Canes was enough sustenance for me.
Justin wants to know if parts are hard to get for the Nirvana.
I wouldn't say they're hard to get. They're in the United States, but you're not going to have like Amazon-like service when you're ordering like spare parts like you can for the Moster at this point, because there's so many places in the US that if you order a new piston ring for your Moster 185, it'll be there, in 1 or 2 business days. The Nirvana, it's going to take like a week to get your parts, because you're going to have to talk to a human being. They're going to have to like load it and pack it with their next shipment that goes out, and then they'll send it out, and you'll get it a little bit later. But parts are here, but there's only 2 folks in the United States I know of that stock parts.
Yeah.
So not hard to get, but you just have to wait a little bit longer for them.
We just need to get a Sky Sports USA for Nirvana. Problem solved. But Nirvana's never break down. You never need your parts, so it's not like you really need it.
I put I've put 80 or 90 hours on mine already and haven't replaced a thing on it. So it's doing pretty good.
Josh Perry wants to know, did you wear like heart rate monitors or anything like that?
No, that would have been interesting data to gather, but I've been on Android infrastructure for a while, and so I've never gotten like the Apple Watch or the Pixel Watch or anything like that. So that would have been really cool information to have analyzed against, though, to see like my heart rate throughout the whole process. I can tell you just from memory, though, the place where my heart rate was the highest was on that launch off of Maui, because I was stressed out that I was going to get hit by that gust as soon as I got my wing overhead, and it was just going to toss me. It was going to toss me like laundry. But thank goodness that did not end up happening.
All right. Sorry, I had to go take a pain pill.
That's good.
She's addicted already.
Yeah.
No, my foot's
Just took one
starting
a half hour ago.
Yeah. Travis wants to know from you if why you keep twirling your chops.
Oh, yeah.
Well, if you had chops like me, you'd play with them too. Actually, there is a reason. No, I'm not going to do that here.
Yeah.
Oh, here.
Jim is asking, where are you originally from? And will you be in Wichita Falls for a while? And where do you hope to get stationed next?
So I grew up originally in Mississippi for the first 18 years of my life. But
Where?
Jackson area. If you're familiar with the small towns, Flowood is.
Oh, yeah. I live in Hattiesburg.
Do you really?
Yeah.
So I went to school in Hattiesburg.
Did you?
Ooh,
Yeah.
I bet you guys dated in high school.
Well, actually, I live in Petal.
Oh, nice.
How
Okay.
about that?
Oh, very cool.
How about that?
Yeah, small world, isn't it?
He was
It
probably
is.
the little boy riding his bike past your house.
Probably so.
Well, I went to college in Hattiesburg. I grew up in Flowood, Mississippi, just south of Jackson, about an hour and a half north of Hattiesburg.
How about that?
Cool.
Yeah, I went to college in Hattiesburg too.
Yeah, spent a lot of time down there.
At USC?
But I'll be in Wichita Falls here for between 12 and 18 months. As far as where I hope to get stationed next, that's going to be a complete toss-up based off of how pilot training goes and what airframe I end up dropping, and et cetera, et cetera. So I really don't even have a whole lot of things to a list to choose from as far as where to put my hopes on. So
Are we doing a spin
Colorado
wheel
would be
tonight?
cool.
Yeah, we can do this.
People want surprises.
Sure. We'll do one. I'm back home. I can try to
Yay.
get the mailbox at some point. Let's do, I guess,
She'll make me walk out there to the mailbox.
yeah. We're just going to do a Just Want to Fly, or one of my flamingo stickers, my flying flamingo. How about that?
Ooh. Spin This Wheel is brought to you by Nirvana. Nirvana. This tastes like I can't afford it.
You know you haven't even tasted it.
I think it's so small. Uh-oh.
It's the slowest moving wheel.
Dang it,
Man.
girl. She wins all the time.
I like how I put Aaron and I in there like 50 times and he didn't win.
Congrats, Bonnie. just private message me. I think I might have your address. I'm not remembering offhand, but if I have if I gave you some stickers already when we met, just let me know and see if I can get you something else. All right, next question. Jim, it wants to know, did we answer all the questions from on this one? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we answered them all. What about where do you hope to get stationed next?
Oh, I said I can't even know. It's going to be so dependent on drop night and when what airframe I end up getting.
You don't get to say, I would like to go here?
I will, but my options will depend on how I do in pilot training.
Oh.
So I don't even know what my options are to even choose. If I could pick out of the blue, Colorado would be a pretty sweet place. I lived there for a little while and it was incredible.
So how far along are you in pilot training then?
I start tomorrow, so haven't even started yet.
Okay. I got to say one thing, going back a few shows, if you guys remember Mikey and Bo from Florida, they messaged me while I was in the hospital and they said they passed and they have their private pilots. So these brothers are working their way to commercial airlines. So they both passed and I was so happy for them. So
nice.
Yeah. And it was cool that they messaged me that. And then they actually did not a video, but they did an audio call with me because they wanted to know what happened to me and stuff. So, but yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congrats to them. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Wait, who passed?
Bo and Mikey.
They died?
No.
Oh, just kidding.
Are you planning another cross-country adventure?
All right. In the near term, I would like to fly down to one of the two importers for Nirvana is in Austin, and so I'd like to fly from here to Austin and back at some point just to go see those guys. I think that'd be a pretty sweet adventure. I haven't even looked at the map or anything to see how far that is. It's about a 5-hour drive, so a little over 4 hours. So I'm sure that would be a multi-stop paramotor adventure to do that.
Now you're going to be with the bougie clique of everybody who flies Nirvana wings and motors with Kent Patterson and Chris Airfoil.
He is
too good for the rest of us.
But I don't have any of the swag like you do, though, so I'll check my privilege. Long term, though, I'm trying to do a north-south paramotor adventure across the entire United States. Starting somewhere along the border of Canada,
Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Come up by us.
Yeah. Centrally in the U.S. somewhere, and then go down to somewhere in the Mexican border in Texas.
Very cool.
That'll be sometime probably next year, probably later in the year with another guy.
Well, I bet if you post it and if you wanted more people, I bet you'd have a bunch of other flyers to join you.
Oh yeah. And right now we're still very much in the conceptualization phase of that adventure as far as planning it out.
Yeah.
But when it becomes a little more real, very possible we advertise a little more and try to open it up for others to join in. We intend to do it unsupported. That doesn't mean people can't join us for legs of it, as they desire. Kind of like with the Wingman challenge, some people just joined in and flew, with a couple folks for one leg at a time, and just
cool,
hung out and just enjoyed the community, which our sport is awesome at.
Yeah. So Tony is asking, no communication with anyone while you flew, or did you just listen to music or anything?
No, just chilled out and was listening to music the whole time.
Cool.
A lot of time, every few minutes, checking my app, make sure I'm on course, and using the little mirror and checking my gas to make sure, my fuel rate and burn is good. But for the most part, it was just a pretty relaxing flight once I got to altitude.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm looking for any other questions. We're down to the, Steve, do you see any more? Everybody's talking just kind of amongst themselves. And
Brian Franz wants to know exactly.
I don't.
Oh, there you go.
Further.
Brian Franz wants to know what Zack is hoping to fly after pilot school.
Oh, that's a tough one. I'd be happy with most anything, but if I had to pick today, it'd probably be like a C-17. I'm going to pilot school pretty late in my career to do anything pointy nosed, but you never know. I might get into training and fly that T-38 and start and really enjoying the sex appeal of a fighter, and we'll see what the cards have in store for me. But
Wow.
So if someone has a lot of sex appeal, why would you go after something that you don't need? That's basically what I'm asking.
Well, there's the sex appeal of the jet itself. I mean, there's nothing quite like being able to take off and fly vertically off the end of the runway to 15,000 feet, like a rocket. So that's pretty cool. But there's also the sex appeal of flying something heavy and just the lifestyle associated with, get up in the morning and for a week go hang out in Singapore, and then come back home. And next thing you know, you're hanging out at home in a week somewhere else,
You just need to do your hike and flies so you can build those legs up and just foot launch a Cosmos and then you get your vertical take off.
Yep, I'm putting it up there. Go for it.
Jim CR120 wants to know if you started enlisted and then got commissioned, or
No, I've been on the O side the whole time. Yeah, I did my first 8 years as a security forces officer doing like law enforcement and air base defense, and then just transitioning.
All right. Well, we hit the 8 o'clock, so didn't even ask Zach if he was interested in doing an after show. If you guys have any further questions, and Zach, are you willing to stick around for maybe 10 minutes after?
Yeah, of course. Always happy to chat and answer any more questions.
Zach,
right.
You're always such a great guest.
I know.
We're always glad to have you.
Well, I just appreciate y'all having me on. It's always a joy to come on and join you guys on your show. So thanks for having me.
And maybe on the days you're not working, if we don't have a guest when we do a party night, we'll get you in here to see what's new with you and where you're at in your flying.
Ooh,
airplane.
we should have a shirtless party night.
A what?
Yeah.
A what?
Nothing. I said a dry t-shirt contest.
Oh, that's what I thought you said.
Uh-huh.
All right. Got any further questions? Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you to everybody that joined, and I'll try to do better at my intros as I get better here.
Show us your foot.
I can't get it up that high right now. But yeah, I'm getting better each day, and it's pretty awesome that everybody's reached out to me. And Zach, I really appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us tonight. It was awesome.
No, thank y'all again for having me.
All right. So next week, hang on, let me look at the calendar. Oh boy, forgot to look. Next week, we have a new, I believe he's a PPG student from the school that I went to, Justin Messler. I think he might be in the chat.
That name sounds familiar.
He will be on next week, so that'll be nice. A newer pilot to talk to and see where he's at, and if he's already done and with training. So cool. All right. I guess, Steve, what do we say?
We don't see you on there. We'll see you in the air.
Good night, everybody. If you want to come in the show, use Google Chrome or Firefox, Foxfire, whatever. Have a good night.
Good night.
Nothing is untrue.